Well, in the last few minutes, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has been telling MPs the government will do whatever it takes to battle the spread of the virus.
I can tell the House that I've invited the official opposition to meet with me first thing tomorrow to discuss the proposed emergency bill that we'll set out before the House next week. In addition to the measures my right honourable friend the Chancellor set out in the budget earlier, the bill will include measures to help in the national effort to keep vital public services running, to support businesses and to help everyone to play their part. Adult social care will be at the front line of our response, with social care providers looking after many of the most vulnerable in society. We're working closely with the sector to make sure it is ready. Tomorrow, the Prime Minister will chair a further meeting of COBRA to decide what further measures may be necessary. We will do the right thing at the right time.
Well, Rishi Sunak's first budget was totally dominated by the fight against coronavirus, as the new Chancellor announced a string of measures to help individuals and businesses get through the difficult next few months. He pledged that sick pay would be available for all employees from the first day of self-isolation. Thousands of retailers, pubs, clubs and cinemas will have their business rates cut. The emergency measures overshadowed the announcement of an extra £175 billion of capital spending over the next 5 years. That will be spent on road, rail and broadband improvements across the country. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Westminster. Gary.
Well, these were some very big guns the government was firing at the coronavirus crisis today. Not only what amounted to 12 billion in focused spending, called a stimulus by the government, on the crisis itself, but also, of course, the Bank of England statement bringing down interest rates and trying to loosen up lending to companies who could easily be in difficulty in the weeks and months ahead. One of the things that strikes you in the documents that came out with the budget is that the growth forecast, even before coronavirus ramped up, and that's when these forecasts come from, they seem to be forecasting pretty anemic growth even then. So you have to wonder what we're in for as this virus grips the country. All of that slightly overshadowed the what was originally planned as a sort of post-election delivery budget, telling the voters we got the message, we're spending the money where you want us to spend it. And boy, was there a lot of money being splashed around out there today. But you keep scratching your head to look for how is it that over the long term, this government intends to pay for all that spending. Borrowing is taking a huge amount of the burden here. There are some taxes going up, but it doesn't look like there's an across-the-board approach to tax raising in the bag right now. This doesn't look like Thatcherism or anything like it. One ex-minister said to me, I'm a Thatcherite. I didn't like that at all. It got big applause in the room. Boris Johnson once said, my philosophy is boosterism, putting booster rockets under the economy. Well, we saw those booster rockets today, but we really still don't properly know how they're going to be paid for.
COVID-19 rewrote this budget. It was meant to be all about fulfilling manifesto pledges, spending on the general election commitments. But the morning headlines proclaimed the strange times. A health minister had the virus. The Governor of the Bank of England announced an emergency interest rate cut and £200 billion extra of bank borrowing.
This is a big package. This is a big package. This is a big package.
We will help the country through this, was his message, and the Chancellor's message too, delivering his first budget barely 4 weeks into the job.
Mr. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to get straight to the issue most on everyone's mind, coronavirus COVID-19. I know how worried people are, worried about their health, the health of their loved ones, their jobs, their income, their businesses, their financial security. And I know they get even more worried when they turn on their TVs and hear talk of markets collapsing and difficult times coming.
Collapsing markets happened so recently they weren't included in the economic forecasts unveiled today. The Chancellor suggested the impact could be grave.
For a period, our productive capacity will shrink. There will also be an impact on the demand side of the economy through a reduction in consumer spending. The combination of those effects will have a significant impact on the UK economy.
That sounded like a thinly coded warning of recession. There was help for businesses and individuals weathering the COVID-19 crisis, including easier access to sick pay for workers who obey instructions to stay at home, and this pledge on the NHS.
Whatever extra resources our NHS needs to cope with coronavirus, it will get. Taken together, the extraordinary measures I have set out today represent £7 billion to support the self-employed, businesses and vulnerable people. To support the NHS and other public services, I am also setting aside today a £5 billion emergency response fund, and I will go further if necessary. That means I am announcing today, in total, a £30 billion fiscal stimulus to support British people, British jobs and British businesses through this moment.
Then he moved into the budget measures the government hoped would dominate the headlines, the spending promises made in the election.
We promised to level up with new roads, railways, broadband and homes. This budget gets it done, and yes, we promised record funding for our NHS and public services. This budget gets it done. This government delivers its promises and gets things done.
On top of the massive boost in infrastructure spending, there was also more on everyday services, much of it paid for with an extra £108 billion of borrowing. The rules that force the government to bring down debt might just get rewritten, he said.
I will review the fiscal framework, consulting widely with a range of experts, and will report back in the autumn if I conclude that any changes are necessary.
The man who was Chancellor until last month and the last Prime Minister both tried to warn the new Chancellor off that course of action.
I noted that he said he was going to be reviewing the fiscal framework in which we operated. I would say merely this, as I've said, prudent management of the public finances is one of the USPs of the Conservative Party, and it is essential that any Conservative government maintains that prudent management.
We mustn't forget that my right honourable friend is only able to deploy that firepower that he has done so today because of the choices of consecutive Conservative Chancellors have made. Choices to control spending, to control borrowing and to control debt. That's why the fiscal rules that we set out in our manifesto are important.
You lived through the last big Tory crisis on Europe. You know how deep this issue of not being a party of tax and spend runs in the party. Could this be the next great conflagration?
Well, it is possible. I think the question is the Conservative Party prepared to support the tax increases that are needed if you are putting up spending in the way that we are putting up spending and you want to maintain sustainable public finances? And that is the choice. And if the Conservative Party is willing to put up those taxes, then public finances can be kept under control.
What's your guess?
Well,
they're going to be pretty uncomfortable with it, aren't they?
I think the Conservative Party would be uncomfortable with putting up taxes.
A small number of pro-EU campaigners gathered outside Parliament. Brexit was barely mentioned in the first post-Brexit budget. The government believes the message from the referendum and last December's election is that voters want more spending, and they'll get it. It's taking our politics in strange directions.
This is a budget which has an admission of failure, an admission that austerity has been a failed experiment.
Today's overspun announcements of a £600 billion investment programme are welcomed in the self-same Tory tabloids which denounced Labour's manifesto plans to invest £500 billion as ruinous Marxist nonsense.
Well, we are in a different world. We've got a Conservative Chancellor proposing a bigger state than we saw under Tony Blair and more borrowing than we saw under Gordon Brown. That isn't what we'd have seen under George Osborne's, but times do change.
A people's budget from a people's government, and I commend it to this House.
He must now wait to see just how coronavirus hits the economy and tests that pledge to spend whatever it takes.
Gary Gibbon. Well, the big question is how much of an impact is the coronavirus going to have on our economy and the public finances? Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is with me now. big speech. What was the big message he was trying to send?
Today, Matt, was all about saying we're going to do whatever it takes. The Bank of England acting together with the new Chancellor to have this rare economic stimulus package, the likes of which we haven't seen since the financial crisis. First, you had the Chancellor's £12 billion boost. That came after the Bank of England's interest rate cut, alongside a £290 billion extra liquidity that's going to help real businesses. Now, the scale of this action tells you how serious they think this crisis is. I went along to the Bank of England's emergency meeting today. This is what the governor had to say.
The Bank of England's role is to help UK businesses and households manage through an economic shock that could prove large and sharp, but should be temporary. These measures will help keep firms in business and people in jobs, and they will prevent a temporary disruption from causing longer-lasting economic harm.
That's his hope, but the truth is neither he nor the government can predict the scale of the crisis. What they're trying to do is cushion the impact on jobs and on household incomes. Growth today, Matt, was already downgraded. That was before the coronavirus. And now many city economists think that it could tip us into a recession this year.
OK, so lower interest rates, lots of money thrown at the problem. This is a fiscal bazooka. But will it hit the target, which is a recession?
Well, look, I think, Matt, having an interest rate cut makes it much easier for the Chancellor to borrow money. It makes it cheaper for him. And that's exactly what he's doing in this budget. If you take a look at the forecasts for the deficit last year and then add in what they said today, you can see from that chart that borrowing goes up in every single year. Now add on top of that the coronavirus measures, and you can see the deficit goes up even higher.
OK, so what about the changes in borrowing? How does that change things?
I don't think you can stress enough what a big departure this is from the vision of the previous government. The fiscal watchdog today likened Mr Sunak's sugar rush spending spree to the Labour government in the run-up to the financial crisis, which is an extraordinary departure for a party that was preaching austerity and eliminating the budget or deficit altogether. You know, remember, this is a budget that does lots of un-Tory things like increasing taxes for corporates, for entrepreneurs, for builders, while simultaneously reversing all the cuts to day-to-day spending. Now, of course, this is the government's economic plan. What happens in the next few weeks is going to be far more important for the economy.
Helia, thanks very much. Jackie?
Well, as Helia was saying, this looks like the biggest sustained giveaway since the early 90s. That's according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, as well as the emergency coronavirus funds. Hundreds of billions of pounds are earmarked for infrastructure spending, which Rishi Sunak described as a chance to level up opportunity and share prosperity. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon reports.
The focus has shifted, but the destination, we're told, is still the same.
If the country needs it, we will build it.
Yeah. Building a fairer, brighter future was the promise to red towns turned blue. So, is this the budget of levelling up? We're in Shildon, the world's first railway town. 13 miles from Durham, or put another way, an hour and a half by bus.
We need a full reality check and live in the real world. I think we kind of need, it would like sort of a swap, like, you know, whether you do the wife swap thing, if they did a life swap.
In a cafe on the Dabble Duck industrial estate, Kay and Ruth have been running this place since they left their jobs in social care last year. Ruth's born and bred here. Kay moved up from Essex to look after her elderly mother. To keep this place going, they work 7 days a week.
I'd love the Chancellor to come and live in my council house. I'd love him to. I'd like him to do my work. I'd like him to go home and try and decorate and everything else that I'm expected to do, as well as pay for everything.
How difficult is life at times?
Very difficult for me, personally. I don't have enough money to support myself. I can't save, I can't go on holiday.
As the home of the world's first steam-powered public railway, that meant job security, until the railway works closed. Today's budget promised new jobs. 750 Treasury posts being shifted out of London, billions on public transport, as well as more power being devolved. But events have made a difference.
Well, I think the levelling up agenda has been tailored back somewhat because of the corona epidemic that we now face.
Ben Houchen is the elected mayor for the Tees Valley. He's been described as one of the most powerful Tory politicians outside London.
Does the budget go far enough?
Well, I think at this stage it absolutely does for Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool. We've got £80 million for Darlington Station, which we stood outside the front of. That will revolutionise local rail travel across the region that serves 750,000 people. We've got a government commitment to a share of £800 million for what will be the UK's first and the world's first industrial-scale carbon capture and storage facility.
No matter who you are or where you were born, you will have every chance to succeed in our modern, dynamic economy.
Oh, yeah. You all right?
Yes, thank you. You?
Yeah, thanks. Oh,
What do you think levelling up means?
Levelling up.
Yep.
The level playing field, so to speak.
Ooh.
I think it's about breaking down that north-south divide that's been so contentious for quite a long time. I think where things started to go wrong is towns like this were built to support the heavy industries. This one in particular was to support the railway industry. It was a major site for wagon manufacturing for the railway. There's a lot of potential, there's a lot of latent workforce here. It's just waiting.
While the Chancellor delivered his budget, we were with a local councillor and 200 or so people she was throwing a party for. Along with Peter, Shirley has signed up for a community opera being performed in Shildon later this year.
is building stuff enough? Will infrastructure do it, or is it way more complicated?
It is complicated, isn't it? That's the thing. And of course, there is no bottomless pit as far as the money's concerned, so...
We certainly have waited long enough in the North East. We've been patient, but now we want something. We want to have a delivery.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, John Glenn. I asked him where all that money handed out in the budget was actually going to come from.
Well, we have made some tough decisions in the past, over the last 10 years, to leave us in a situation where we've been able to make those decisions that the Chancellor has announced in the budget today. We had a deficit of 10% when we came into office. It's now below 2%, and that's the context. The big highlight of today's decisions is around the coronavirus, actually doing what's necessary to deal with what is a very unexpected and very serious challenge to our public services delivery in difficult times, but also to individuals and small businesses in particular, who will have a very sharp interruption to their business activities.
The Office of Budget Responsibility.
Yes.
Now, they said today that, debt levels, public service net debt could reach £2,031 billion by 2024, and they're not happy with that number. They basically think there's a real danger of a debt bomb down the line.
Yeah, but they've also said that it's within the framework of 3% of GDP that we've set. And of course, this is a very difficult time to make binding judgments about the future, because we're in an unprecedented crisis. And at future fiscal events, at the budget that is planned at the end of the year, we will have to come to terms with whatever situation we're in.
Right, so what you're acknowledging is that, depending on what environment we find ourselves in, some of the promises made today may not become a reality.
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that we've had to combine two drivers and two contextual realities for this budget.
So the government will continue to borrow for as long as it takes, basically. Debt is now king.
The government will continue to operate within the rules that it set out, and we will be working in that framework as we work through the future fiscal events.
What's bedeviling all of us at the moment is coronavirus. The World Health Organization today, raised the level to a pandemic. It's officially now a pandemic. And the reason why they did that and used that very chilling word is in order to deliver a wake-up call. They basically said, they spelt it out, we haven't done enough. And that includes our country as well, I think, by inference. What do you say to that?
Well, I haven't seen the detail of the announcement, but what I do know is the detail of what the government's been working on over the last 2 weeks that we've announced in the budget today. And what we've also said, and what the Prime Minister and the Chancellor said at the dispatch box, is that we will keep taking advice and we will do whatever it takes to deal appropriately with the extent of the challenges that as they arrive.
If we have to do whatever it takes, to deal with this crisis, why not lock down schools and universities, or indeed cities, right now?
I think the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Health, and other senior ministers are working very closely with the Chief Scientific Officer and the Chief Health Officer to actually do what is right for our country in the context of the threats as they see them.
So when the World Health Organization says there have been alarming levels of inactivity given the seriousness of this infection, you don't think that refers to us?
What I'm saying is that we need to work within the global framework, take advice from our friends and those that we work with across the globe. But at the end of the day, we have to rely on those that mediate the advice to government. That's our Chief Medical Officer, our Chief Science Officer. I think that that's the right approach, and I think that's one that the country should feel confident in.
John Glenn, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Public Health England is now tracing everyone who had close contact with the Health Minister, Nadine Dorries, after she revealed she had been diagnosed with coronavirus. One of her aides has also tested positive, although there are currently no plans to shut down Parliament or to close it to visitors. Our political correspondent Liz Bates reports.
At the forefront of the government's response to the coronavirus, Health Minister Nadine Dorries is now the first MP to be diagnosed with it. She is now at home and has closed down her parliamentary office. At her weekend constituency surgery, she met up to 12 people here. Any of those now feeling unwell are being told to seek medical advice. But her main concern? Her 84-year-old mum. Ms Dorries said her mum has a cough and is being tested for the virus. In Westminster tonight, the Health Secretary said Ms Dorries' case had brought the issue home, but following talks with the Speaker this afternoon, he insisted that Parliament would keep its doors open.
Of course, in some ways this House may have to function differently, but the ability to hold the government to account and to legislate are as vital in a time of emergency as in normal times. Our democracy is the foundation of our way of life.
I was very fortunate that I had a PE teacher, that recognised my skills.
And this is why some have called for the shutdown. Events like this that take place in Westminster every week. Ms Dorries attended one last Thursday celebrating International Women's Day. Among the guests was Boris Johnson. But Number 10 sources insist that the Prime Minister has no symptoms and won't be tested. A spokesperson for Parliament said there are no plans to suspend the House, whilst the Department for Health said anyone who has been in close contact with Ms Dorries will be traced. Those who haven't been contacted are unlikely to be at risk. The Health Minister's office will be cleaned, but before any further action is taken, they will wait for advice from the experts. And many MPs agree with the approach.
I do believe that Parliament needs to keep on meeting, because if the government wants to introduce emergency legislation, it needs Parliament to sit. If it wants to renew that, it's got to have Parliament sitting. And if it wants to change it to meet the changing needs of coronavirus, it still needs Parliament to be sitting.
But others are calling for more robust measures to protect parliamentary staff.
So one of the things that we're questioning is whether it's actually would be a sensible thing to do in a precautionary approach to protect both staff working within the House and also to ensure that government can continue and Parliament can continue to have a temporary ban on visitors to the House of Commons.
Today, as the Treasury was preparing for the budget, it was also responding to its own coronavirus scare. After the partner of an official tested positive, and as a precaution, the department was deep cleaned overnight. But with the world failing to keep coronavirus in check, it looks like Westminster could be its latest victim.
Well, the Labour MP Rachel Maskell has been advised to self-isolate after she had a meeting with Nadine Dorries last week. Earlier, I asked her if there were enough safeguards for people going into Parliament.
The opposition and the government have played a pivotal role in looking at how we can protect people from coronavirus today, the budget being part of that. I know the Procedures Committee has been looking at how we can continue to ensure that our Parliament functions in a way that addresses these really serious issues we're facing at the moment.
And in terms of the advice you've been given, how long do you think you will be in self-isolation for?
Well, I was told 14 days from the point of contact, and I've already had 6 of those days. So until the 19th of March, I'll be free again to be out in the community.
Well, NHS England says it is ramping up its testing capacity to around 10,000 coronavirus tests per day. This comes after some people claim they've experienced frustrating delays trying to get themselves tested, even though they've displayed key symptoms. Here's Aisha Tal.
In the chic surroundings of a Wolverhampton car park opposite the local KFC, there's a new drive-through in town, a coronavirus testing station. In the first 2 days it's been open, 16 cars have passed through, sent here only after they've called NHS 111. Over 27,000 people have been tested in the UK as of today, but there's been criticism from those who want tests that are still waiting. We've come here to meet Olivier and Antonio. Now they're self-isolating, so we're going to speak to them through a door quite a distance away and over the phone. After initially calling 111 several times, they wanted to speak to a medical professional and went to a coronavirus assessment pod.
That's why we decided to go to the hospital, because we thought that they would be probably the medical experts to give us a little bit of comfort and more instructions.
If we don't have the virus, we're gonna catch it here. There was no hand sanitizer, there was nothing to disinfect the surfaces.
I think that what is really shocking is the sense of abandonment of people, like letting you do whatever you think is fit, but no direction, no instructions, no guidance.
Mike Tinmouth is also self-isolating after a trip via Singapore. 2 days after he returned, he started feeling unwell and had a temperature of 40.5. He's now called 111 4 times. After his third call, he was told there was an error and his case hadn't been escalated for testing as it should. He's also concerned about his partner.
He's a teacher, so he works in a school, and that was one of the more worrying things. And we flagged this on day one with NHS 111 and continue to flag it. But again, there is just been a lack of any personalised response. It feels like the system is sort of buckling. And even when I was talking to people at NHS 111 last Wednesday for the first time, there was definitely a sense that they did not know necessarily what was going on or how best to handle it.
NHS England said the 111 phone line is understandably busy, but all inquiries are being responded to. Public Health England has defended its decision not to test everyone reporting symptoms, saying they must focus on those at highest risk. Homerton Hospital says the average wait at their coronavirus pod on the day in question was 30 minutes. But for everyone we spoke to, all they want is a test so they know where they stand.